Michael Jordan finds out a college took advantage of a star player. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The basketball court is where legends are born. For one college player, the path to greatness began long before the national spotlight shone on him. It was in the heart of a small school, where the gym's worn-out floors echoed with the sound of a ball bouncing, where he first picked up a basketball and began to dream of something bigger. From the very beginning, this player was different. He had a natural ability that others could only dream of. His speed, his agility, his ability to read the game, it was clear that he was special. But it wasn't just his physical talent that set him apart, it was his mindset. He understood the game in ways others didn't. He played with a sense of purpose, an intensity that burned bright every time he stepped onto the court. Coaches and teammates saw it, and so did the scouts. This was no ordinary player, this was a future star. The college team was struggling. For years, they had been overshadowed by bigger schools, lost in the shadows of more powerful programs. But that all changed the moment this player stepped onto the court. His arrival was like a spark in a dry forest. His talent quickly turned the team around, and it wasn't long before they became the talk of the league. With every game, his name spread across the media, and soon, he was more than just a player, he was a phenomenon. As his performances got better, so did the expectations. The school's marketing department quickly saw the value of his image. Posters with his face adorned the campus walls, and his jersey number was all anyone could talk about. His highlights played on loop on social media, and his college team's games were packed with fans hoping to catch a glimpse of him in action. He was the centerpiece of a marketing strategy that seemed to promise a bright future, not just for the team, but for the school itself. But as his fame grew, so did the pressure. Every game, every move he made on the court, was scrutinized. For the first time, he realized what it meant to be in the public eye. The smiles and cheers from the fans were a double-edged sword. The media loved him, but they also demanded more. Every win was expected. Every loss felt like a failure. And the weight of that pressure began to wear on him. Still, he played on, pushing through the exhaustion and the stress. But there was something else beneath the surface that no one could see, the financial struggles. His scholarship, which covered tuition, left him with little else. Despite being the face of the team and a significant source of revenue for the school, he had to cut corners to get by. He ate ramen noodles for dinner, skipped meals, and lived in a small dorm room that barely felt like home. He had no money for extras, no savings, and not even enough for a simple lunch most days. Yet, there he was, representing a school that was making millions off his image. The administration turned a blind eye to his struggles. They were more focused on the ticket sales, the merchandise with his name on it, and the sponsorships rolling in from major companies. The college was thriving thanks to his performance, but he was barely scraping by. It was a system designed to profit off his talent without offering much in return. He was expected to be grateful for the opportunity, an opportunity that, in reality, wasn't enough to cover the basics of daily life. His teammates, too, saw the imbalance. They knew he was the reason the school was winning games and gaining attention, but they also saw the toll it was taking on him. They were there for him in the locker room, offering words of encouragement and advice, but they couldn't help with the real problem. It wasn't just about basketball anymore, it was about fairness, about being treated with respect for the value he brought to the table. Despite the growing tension, the star player kept pushing forward, focused on his goal of getting to the NBA. The scouts were watching closely, and every game was another chance to prove his worth. His talent was undeniable, and his potential was limitless. But even as his star rose, the cracks in the system began to show. The reality of what it meant to be a college athlete, to be used as a commodity, started to weigh heavily on him. And then came the moment that would change everything. It wasn't a game-winning shot or a record-breaking play. It wasn't even a moment for the history books. It was a simple, quiet realization that he had been taken advantage of, and that the school had been profiting off his hard work without offering him the support he needed. He wasn't just a player to them, he was a product, a tool to bring in revenue. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. The world saw the highlight reels and the packed arenas, but behind the scenes, he was struggling. He began to wonder how many other athletes were in the same situation, trapped in a system that valued their talent but not their well-being. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about the future of college athletics, about the rights of athletes who were being exploited for their talent without any regard for their humanity. He knew something had to change, and he was determined to be the one to bring that change about. But it wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. The NCAA was a powerful institution, and taking them on was a risk. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no other choice. If he didn't speak up, no one else would. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for all the athletes who had been used and discarded by the system. This was just the beginning. The next steps would require courage, but he was ready. The stage had been set, and the drama that would unfold would change the course of college athletics forever. What started as a quiet injustice would soon become a national conversation, and the player who once dreamed of making it to the NBA would soon become a symbol of something much larger, a champion for fairness in sports. The rise of a star was only the first chapter of a story that would forever alter the landscape of college basketball and the very nature of the NCAA system. It was a story of ambition, exploitation, and the pursuit of justice. And it was just getting started. The college basketball program had always been a small fish in a vast ocean. But everything changed the moment the star player arrived. For years, the school had been underperforming, constantly overlooked in a sea of larger, more successful programs. But with this new recruit, everything shifted. In his first season, the team began to rise. He was exceptional. The star player's every move on the court sparked excitement. A player who could single-handedly carry his team to victory, his passes precise, and his leadership undeniable. The fans flocked to the games in droves, and suddenly, the small college became a hotbed for attention. There was no denying that the player was the driving force behind the school's newfound success. The spotlight was on him, and the school wasn't going to let it slip away. The marketing department moved quickly. Posters featuring his face went up in every corner of the campus. His name was emblazoned on merchandise, from jerseys to hats, and sold out in minutes. T-shirts, bumper stickers, and even limited edition sneakers were designed with his likeness. The school's social media platforms exploded with posts about him. Sponsors, eager to capitalize on his rising fame, began pouring money into the program. National and local businesses alike wanted a piece of the action, and they all knew the key to success was tying their brand to the star player's image. While the school's finances were booming, the pressure on the young athlete was increasing. At first, it felt like a dream. He was the face of the team, and everything seemed to be falling into place. The crowds cheered, the media adored him, and he was becoming a household name. Yet, despite the constant praise, there was an underlying feeling that something wasn't right. The star player was becoming the golden goose, a source of endless revenue for the school. The fans were buying into the myth that his success on the court was the result of hard work, but few questioned the behind-the-scenes reality. The school was profiting in ways the player couldn't even begin to comprehend. For every highlight reel, for every game he played, the college was raking in money. The student-athlete's likeness had become a brand, a product that the school was more than happy to sell. The financial success was undeniable. The school's athletic department saw record-breaking revenue. Ticket sales for games, once an afterthought, soared to new heights. Corporate sponsors lined up to partner with the team, securing lucrative deals for the program. The school began to pour money into the basketball facilities, upgrading locker rooms and arenas, all thanks to the star player's efforts on the court. But while the school flourished, the player's situation remained largely unchanged. His scholarship covered only the basics: tuition, room, and board. It didn't account for the little things, meals, textbooks, and the many other expenses of daily life. He was living on a shoestring budget, while the school was raking in millions from his image. No one seemed to care about his struggles, not when there was so much money at stake. Behind the scenes, the administration and the athletic department were making decisions that prioritized the financial gain over the well-being of their star player. Coaches and faculty members became well-versed in using his image to further their own agendas. The program's success was built on his talent, yet his financial situation barely changed. The star player was expected to be the cornerstone of the team's success, but he was also expected to keep quiet and play the game, no questions asked. The pressure continued to mount. Every game was more intense, every moment on the court more scrutinized. The star player's every move was watched by millions of fans and a sea of corporate sponsors, all with expectations of greatness. But behind the scenes, he was struggling. There were days when he would skip meals just to get by. He would eat whatever was cheapest, hoping it would be enough to fuel him through practice and games. The mental and physical toll of being a college athlete was taking its toll, and yet the expectations from the school, the media, and the fans never wavered. His teammates were supportive, but they too were living with their own challenges. Many of them came from similar backgrounds, struggling to make ends meet while balancing academics and sports. But none of them could change the system. They were all caught in a cycle that prioritized the success of the program over their personal needs. They played the game, performed at their best, and hoped for a future that would be better than the present. The college's athletic department was keenly aware of the disparity between what the star player brought in and what he received in return. But as long as the money kept flowing in, no one seemed eager to rock the boat. The system was working for the school. The stadium was packed, the merchandise was flying off the shelves, and alumni donations were pouring in. The star player had become the face of a profitable machine, and the school was making sure to keep it running smoothly. But as the season wore on, cracks in the system began to show. The star player, despite his on-court success, was growing disillusioned. He began to see the difference between the wealth the school was accumulating and the little he had to show for it. He started to notice how little support the athletes received from the administration, despite the fact that they were the ones carrying the weight of the program's success. The feeling of being exploited grew stronger. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his hard work was not being adequately compensated. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect. The system was built to exploit athletes, to use their talent for financial gain while offering little in return. The star player wasn't just a student athlete, he was a commodity. Soon, he began questioning the system. He saw that other players were being treated the same way, pushed to their limits for the sake of the program's success. He wasn't the only one. There were countless others in the same situation, trapped in a cycle of exploitation. The more he reflected on his own situation, the more he realized that something needed to change. And that's when the turning point came. The star player realized that he wasn't alone. Others were beginning to speak up, quietly voicing their frustrations about the system that was built to profit off their talent. The star player's dissatisfaction with the college's treatment of athletes began to grow. The more he saw how the system took advantage of athletes like him, the more determined he became to change it. The school had made millions off his image. He would need to speak out. The star player was ready to make his voice heard. Consequences. The pressure was mounting, and he knew that things could no longer continue as they were. The college had used him as a means to an end, but the time had come for him to fight for something greater, justice for all student athletes. The story was about to take a dramatic turn, and the star player's fight for fairness was about to become a national issue. The stage was set, and the battle between the student athletes and the system was about to begin. What had started as a personal frustration was about to explode into a full-scale movement. The star player's rise to fame had made him the face of college basketball, but now, he was about to become the voice for all those who had been silenced by the system. The college may have been profiting off his talent, but it was time for him to take control of his own narrative. The Golden Goose was no longer just an asset to be exploited, it was a symbol of change. When the cameras were off and the fans were gone, the star player was just another college student trying to get by. On the court, he was a hero, but behind the scenes, the reality was much darker. The fame and the recognition that came with being the centerpiece of a successful basketball program meant nothing when it came to basic needs. The star player's life wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. In fact, it was a struggle, one that many fans couldn't even begin to imagine. The star player had grown accustomed to the grueling schedule. Practices, games, and traveling left little room for much else. He was constantly moving, often sleeping in hotels or on buses, his body exhausted from the physical toll basketball took on him. In between it all, he had to balance classes, homework, and assignments, while keeping up the appearance of a student-athlete who had it all together. It was an exhausting existence, and one that left little time for himself. Despite his growing fame, his financial situation hadn't improved. His scholarship covered tuition and housing, but not much else. The cost of books, meals, and transportation was left to him to manage. And it wasn't easy. The star player often found himself skipping meals or eating the cheapest food available just to make it through the day. The school wasn't offering any help beyond the bare minimum, even though they were benefiting immensely from his contributions. The stress of the situation weighed heavily on him. He had signed up for college basketball with the dream of going pro, but the pressure to perform on the court, combined with his constant struggle to make ends meet, made it difficult to stay focused. His body ached from the grueling practices, and his mind often wandered, exhausted by the constant juggling act between his role as a student and as a star athlete. Yet, the star player wasn't the only one dealing with these struggles. His teammates were in the same boat. While their roles on the court were important, they weren't as visible as his. Still, their lives were much the same, filled with long hours of practice, limited resources, and little to no financial support from the school. Most of them came from backgrounds where every dollar counted, and none of them could afford the luxuries that came with fame. The team's dynamic was strong. They supported each other, both on and off the court. The star player's teammates were always there to offer words of encouragement, and they had formed tight bonds through their shared experiences. They understood the pressure they were under and the sacrifices they were making. But there was a common feeling that they were being taken advantage of, that they were giving so much without receiving anything in return. The coaches, too, were well aware of the struggles the players faced. They knew that their star player and the rest of the team were living in less than ideal conditions, but the reality was that they were all a part of a system that didn't offer much in the way of support. The coaches were focused on winning, on maintaining the success the program had achieved with the help of their talented players. They wanted their athletes to focus on basketball and on winning games, not on the financial difficulties or the lack of resources. Winning meant sponsorships, media attention, and money. In the eyes of the administration, that was the most important thing. But the star player and his teammates were beginning to feel the weight of it all. The system was built to profit off their hard work and success, but they weren't seeing the rewards. The constant travel, the long hours spent practicing, and the stress of academic life all compounded to create an environment that was mentally and physically exhausting. The athletes were expected to be perfect, to represent the school in the best possible light. But no one cared about their well-being beyond what they could contribute on the court. Behind closed doors, there was a growing sense of frustration. Some of the players began to speak out, quietly at first, voicing their dissatisfaction with the way things were being handled. They knew the risks. Speaking out could lead to backlash, both from the administration and from the fans. But the longer they stayed silent, the more they realized that nothing was going to change unless someone stood up. The star player was the most vocal, but his frustration wasn't just about his own situation. He saw the bigger picture. He saw how the system was designed to benefit everyone except the athletes. The school, the coaches, the sponsors, all of them were profiting off the hard work and talent of young men who were often struggling to make ends meet. The star player began to wonder how many other athletes were in the same situation, how many others were being used in the same way. He began to see himself as a symbol, not just for his own struggle but for the struggles of all college athletes. This was when the realization hit him the hardest: the school was using him. They weren't just promoting him for his talent, they were profiting off his image, his likeness, and his name. The jerseys with his number were flying off the shelves, the ticket sales were higher than ever, and the media attention was endless. Yet, he was getting none of the financial benefits. His name was becoming a brand, but he had no control over it. The school was selling merchandise with his likeness, but he wasn't seeing a penny of the profit. It was a bitter pill to swallow. He had been taught to focus on basketball, to work hard, and to do whatever it took to succeed. But now he understood that the system didn't care about his success, it only cared about what he could give them. The star player had always known there were sacrifices to be made, but this was different. He had sacrificed his time, his energy, and his physical well-being for the game, but now he realized that he was also sacrificing something even more important as well, his dignity. They watched as the school made millions off their hard work, and they began to question why they weren't seeing any of that money. The coaches, too, began to feel the tension. They were in a difficult position, torn between supporting their athletes and maintaining the status quo that had made the program so successful. They knew that the star player was unhappy, but they also knew that if the system changed, everything might collapse. The college's administrators were well aware of the situation, but they chose to ignore it. The money kept rolling in, and as long as the team kept winning, no one was going to rock the boat. But the cracks in the system were beginning to show, and the star player's growing dissatisfaction was only the beginning. As the tension mounted, the players began to realize that the only way things would change was if they spoke up. The star player knew that he couldn't keep silent any longer. His frustration had reached a breaking point, and he knew that if nothing was done, the system would continue to exploit athletes like him. It was time for change. But the road ahead was uncertain. Speaking out came with risks, and there was no guarantee that anyone would listen. Still, the star player was determined. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for every college athlete who had been treated the same way. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about fairness, justice, and the recognition of the value that athletes brought to the table. The time for silence had passed. The star player was ready to speak out, and in doing so, he would ignite a movement that would change the world of college sports forever. The tension that had been building over the course of the season had reached its boiling point. The star player's frustration had grown to a level where it could no longer be contained. What started as a quiet dissatisfaction was now an all-consuming realization that he was being exploited. It wasn't just about the unfairness of the system, it was about the way his humanity was being overlooked in favor of profits. The more he thought about it, the more clear it became. He wasn't just a player, he was a commodity. It wasn't the bright lights of the arena or the cheers of the crowd that bothered him anymore. What was worse was what happened off the court. As the team's success continued, the college was reaping the benefits: larger crowds, increased merchandise sales, new sponsorships. The star player was at the center of it all, and the school was using his image to generate revenue. Yet, despite all of this, his own situation remained unchanged. He had no money for personal expenses, no financial support beyond the bare minimum provided by his scholarship. No one seemed to care. The breaking point came after a particularly grueling stretch of games. The star player had just led his team to another victory, but something felt different. His body was exhausted, but more than that, his mind was heavy with the weight of what he had been enduring. He had been playing through injuries, pushing himself to his limits, all while knowing that the school was benefiting from his pain without offering him anything in return. It was more than just physical exhaustion, it was emotional and mental exhaustion. It all came to a head during a game against a rival school. The tension between the two teams had been building for weeks. The rival school's fans had been vocal, taunting the star player at every opportunity. The pressure to perform was overwhelming. His coach was shouting instructions from the sidelines, his teammates were looking to him for leadership, and the fans were on the edge of their seats. But none of it seemed to matter anymore. As the game wore on, the star player's energy began to wane. He had been pushing himself for weeks, and it was starting to show. With just minutes left in the game, the star player collapsed on the court. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't a result of an injury. It was the culmination of everything: the constant physical strain, the emotional weight of being used, and the mental exhaustion from juggling his academic responsibilities. The crowd fell silent as medical staff rushed onto the court. It wasn't a typical injury timeout. It was something more profound. The team rallied around him, but the damage was already done. As he lay there, unable to get back up, the star player realized that something had to change. He couldn't keep doing this. The game was no longer just about basketball, it was about his well-being, and the realization that the system he had been working within wasn't sustainable. The aftermath of the collapse was a blur. The medical team cleared him to play in the next game, but something had changed within him. The star player had always been willing to sacrifice for the game, but now he was questioning whether that sacrifice was worth it. His body had taken a toll, his mental health was deteriorating, and he had come to the painful conclusion that he was being used by the very system he had dedicated himself to. In the days that followed, the star player became withdrawn. He wasn't speaking to the media, and his interactions with his teammates were more distant than usual. His performance in practice was lackluster, and his passion for the game seemed to fade with each passing day. The college had made millions off his talent, but now he was beginning to question whether it was all worth it. But the turning point came in the form of a conversation with one of his teammates. They had always been close, sharing the ups and downs of the season together. The teammate, noticing the change in the star player's demeanor, sat down with him after practice. "Are you okay?" the teammate asked, concern in their voice. The star player hesitated before speaking. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I've given everything I have to this program, but I'm still just another cog in the machine. It's not just the basketball anymore. It's everything. I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out." The teammate nodded. "I don't know," the star player admitted. They too had felt the weight of the system, the constant expectations. It was the first time he had spoken those words of performance. For weeks, but they also knew that speaking out wasn't easy, especially when everything depended on keeping up appearances. The school had the power, the money, what are you going to do? Influence. He was just one player. But in that moment, he realized that he wasn't alone. His teammates, his fellow athletes, were all struggling in the same way. They were all part of a broken system that was built to profit off their hard work while offering them nothing in return. The conversation with his teammate was a catalyst. It was the spark that lit the fire inside him. The star player knew he couldn't just walk away and hope things would get better. He couldn't ignore the reality of what was happening around him. His voice, his story, could be the turning point. But speaking up would come with consequences. It wasn't just about his future, it was about the future of all student athletes, and that was a responsibility he couldn't ignore. As he lay awake that night, the decision became clear. He would speak out. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be without its challenges, but it was the only way to make a difference. The star player knew the risks: backlash from the school, anger from the coaches, and disappointment from fans who saw him as a hero. But he also knew that the system had to change. The college athletics world had to recognize the value of its athletes and treat them fairly. The next day, the star player walked into the coach's office with a sense of purpose. His decision was made. He would no longer stay silent. It was time to take a stand. The coach, seeing the determination in his eyes, knew that something had shifted. But the coach also knew the difficulty of what was about to unfold. "Are you sure about this?" the coach asked, his voice laced with concern. "I have to," the star player said. "This is bigger than basketball. It's about respect. It's about fairness. I can't keep pretending everything is okay." The coach nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. He had always pushed his players hard, but he knew the system wasn't fair. And as much as he wanted to protect his star player, he also understood that sometimes change required sacrifice. The breaking point had arrived. The star player's decision to speak out would set in motion a chain of events that would change college athletics forever. It wasn't just a personal decision, it was a stand for all the athletes who had been overlooked, used, and undervalued. And as he walked out of the coach's office, he knew that the fight was only beginning. It started quietly, in the middle of a routine media day for the NCAA basketball season. The star player, still reeling from the physical and emotional exhaustion, sat before the cameras, attempting to maintain his usual calm. The media personnel, eager to capture another soundbite from the rising star, had no idea that this day would change everything. The questions about the upcoming season, his goals, and his thoughts on the team were the usual, but then came the question that shifted the course of the conversation. A reporter, trying to probe deeper into the star player's thoughts, asked, "With all the success you've had this season, how do you balance your personal life and the pressure that comes with being the face of the team?" It was an innocent question, one that many athletes had been asked 1,000 times. But this time, something inside the star player snapped. It wasn't the reporter's fault, and it wasn't a new topic, but something about the question, something about the weight of his own struggles, triggered the release he had been holding back. The player paused for a moment before answering. "It's hard," he said, his voice unsteady. "People think it's just basketball, that everything is perfect. But there's a lot more that people don't see. There's a lot more to it than what's on the court. I'm giving everything I have to this school, to this program, but there's nothing coming back to me. I'm being used, just like every other athlete here. I'm expected to give my all, but when it comes to me, no one seems to care." The room fell silent. The media personnel looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't the typical answer they had been expecting. But the star player wasn't finished. "I've been playing through injuries. I've been putting in hours and hours of work, and I can't even afford a decent meal half the time. I'm expected to be the face of this program, but no one is willing to give me the support I need. This isn't just about basketball, it's about fairness. It's about respect. And I'm tired of pretending that everything is okay." The bombshell had been dropped. The media room exploded with questions. The reporters fired off follow-ups, but the star player didn't back down. This wasn't about the game anymore. This was about his life, his future, and the system that had been taking advantage of him for far too long. He was done being the silent star, the figurehead who brought in millions for the college while he barely scraped by. This moment would be the beginning of a national conversation that would change the way the NCAA operated forever. By the time the media day ended, the story had already begun to spread. Sports outlets, social media platforms, and news stations picked up the story within hours. Swift and harsh. The star player had finally spoken out, which had long relied on the star player's image to boost their own bottom line, with athletes across the country. The narrative. They saw press releases that they had been missing for years. Attempts were made to discredit his claims, to speak the truth about the unfairness of the system, to publicly defend the program. They tried to paint him as a disgruntled player, someone who had let the pressure of the season get to him. But the damage had already been done. The public, however, wasn't easily swayed. Fans, especially those who had followed the star player's rise to prominence, were divided. Some stood behind him, applauding his courage to speak out against a system that had long been exploitative. Others, however, criticized him for being ungrateful, for not understanding the opportunity he had been given. The debate grew heated, but one thing was certain: the star player's words had struck a chord. The backlash against the player grew louder as the days passed. The school attempted to downplay the situation, but every attempt to deflect only seemed to fuel the fire. Sports analysts, former athletes, and even fans began to weigh in. On social media, the hashtag #PayThePlayers began to trend, and athletes from other schools, past and present, joined the conversation. The star player wasn't alone. His bravery had ignited a movement that had been building for years, a movement that was now ready to take center stage. It wasn't just about him anymore. The story had become a symbol for every college athlete who had been used and exploited by the NCAA and its member schools. It was a battle not only for fair compensation but for the recognition of their value beyond just being a source of revenue. The star player had become a leader of a movement that was larger than himself, and he had no intention of backing down. Behind the scenes, the star player was bombarded with calls from people wanting to support him. Advocacy groups, former players, and even celebrities who had experienced the same system reached out. Some offered legal help, while others offered words of encouragement. The support was overwhelming, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The star player knew that speaking out had consequences. The pressure on him was immense, and the road ahead was uncertain. As the days went by, the NCAA and the college found themselves under intense scrutiny. The star player's claims were gaining traction, and lawmakers began to take notice. Talks of reforming college sports started to heat up, and a national conversation about the compensation of student athletes began to take shape. The star player had set the wheels of change in motion, but the fight was far from over. For the first time, the star player felt a sense of control over his situation. He wasn't just a player being told what to do, he was the one making the decisions now. He was no longer a pawn in a system designed to profit off his talent. He was a voice for change, and the world was listening. The media continued to cover the story, and soon, it wasn't just about the star player's claims, it was about the system itself. The more people talked about it, the more undeniable it became. The NCAA was a billion-dollar industry built on the backs of athletes who were not being fairly compensated for their labor. The star player's words had opened the floodgates, and there was no going back. But as the story continued to unfold, the star player knew that the journey wasn't going to be easy. The backlash from the school, the coaches, and even some of his teammates would continue. There would be challenges, and there would be obstacles along the way. But he was ready. His message was clear, the time for change had come, and he was going to be at the forefront of it. The public bombshell had set the stage for what would become a monumental battle for fairness and justice in college athletics. The star player had made his stand, and now, the world was waiting to see what would happen next. The fallout from the star player's public comments was swift and intense. What had initially been an offhand remark during a media day quickly became a full-blown crisis. As the media scrambled to cover the story, the college, the NCAA, and the athletic department were all put on the defensive. The narrative was no longer about the player's on-court performance or the upcoming games. It was about a deep-rooted issue that had been swept under the rug for too long, the exploitation of student athletes. For the college, the backlash was overwhelming. In the days following the star player's remarks, the school issued multiple statements trying to mitigate the damage. They denied any wrongdoing, claiming they had always provided the necessary resources for student athletes. They argued that the scholarship programs were more than generous, offering students not just an education but the chance to showcase their talents on a national stage. But these responses fell flat. The public wasn't buying the narrative anymore. People began to see the cracks in the system. On social media, the reaction was split. Some fans, particularly those who had followed the star player's journey from the beginning, rallied around him. They expressed their support, calling for fairness and equality for student athletes. The hashtag #PayThePlayers gained traction quickly, with many former athletes, both college and professional, adding their voices to the conversation. The star player had ignited a fire, and it was spreading fast. However, not everyone was supportive. The media painted the player as ungrateful, focusing on his decision to speak out rather than the substance of his claims. Critics argued that he was throwing away a golden opportunity, a full scholarship, and the chance to play in the most prestigious basketball league in the world. They said he should be grateful for the chance to represent the school, that athletes like him were receiving more than enough compensation for their talents, who had always relied on the star player's image to sell tickets, merchandise, and television rights, were now facing the consequences of his public outburst. They quickly went into damage control mode, calling emergency meetings and reaching out to their PR teams. But the damage was already done. The spotlight was no longer on the team's success, it was on the growing discontent among the athletes who felt overlooked and underappreciated. For the coaches, the situation was equally tense. They were caught in the middle of a brewing storm. On one hand, they had to maintain their loyalty to the program and the school. They were expected to publicly defend the college and downplay the claims of the star player. On the other hand, they understood the difficulties athletes faced, the long hours, the injuries, and the pressure to perform at the highest level, all while receiving little to no financial support beyond their scholarships. Coaches knew that if the system changed, it could drastically affect their careers as well, but they also knew the truth: the current system wasn't fair. Some of the assistant coaches and staff members tried to reach out to the star player in private, expressing their support. They knew that the star player's actions had opened a door that couldn't be closed. There was a growing sense that change was necessary. However, these conversations remained mostly private. Publicly, the coaches had to follow the script and defend the program, even as they quietly acknowledged the unfairness of the system. As the controversy raged on, the star player remained resolute. He refused to back down. The flood of media attention was overwhelming, but he had expected it. What surprised him most was the amount of support he received from his fellow athletes. Former professional players, current college athletes, and even coaches reached out to express their solidarity. Many of them had lived through the same struggles: the endless practice hours, the constant travel, the injuries, and the paltry financial compensation for their efforts. The backlash from some quarters didn't shake his resolve. Instead, it strengthened his determination to continue speaking out. He realized that his words had given a voice to those who had long been silenced by the system. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for every college athlete who had ever been exploited for their talent without receiving fair compensation. This wasn't just a battle for financial fairness, it was a battle for the dignity and recognition of all student athletes. In the midst of the chaos, the NCAA began to take notice. The organization, which had long defended the status quo, now found itself under intense pressure. The growing public outcry was impossible to ignore. Politicians, sports analysts, and even ordinary fans were questioning the NCAA's practices. Calls for reform were coming from all directions. It wasn't just a few disgruntled athletes now, it was a national movement. The spotlight was on the NCAA's profit-driven model, and they couldn't hide from it any longer. Behind closed doors, the NCAA began to strategize. They were in damage control mode, but they also knew that change was inevitable. The organization was facing growing criticism not just from athletes but from lawmakers as well. There were talks of new legislation that would force the NCAA to pay athletes, or at least provide them with compensation for their likeness and image. As the pressure mounted, the NCAA issued a statement saying they were committed to evaluating the current model of college sports and that they were exploring new opportunities to better support student athletes. This statement, however, was met with skepticism. The star players' comments had opened a floodgate, and there was no turning back. The NCAA was no longer in control of the conversation. The fight for fair compensation for college athletes had begun, and it was clear that the star player had become the face of this movement. For the star player, the fallout was both empowering and exhausting. He knew that he had started something that could change the landscape of college sports forever, but it was coming at a personal cost. His life had been thrown into chaos. He was hounded by the media, bombarded with interview requests, and forced to deal with the backlash from fans who didn't understand why he was speaking out. He had become a lightning rod for a debate that was much bigger than basketball. Despite the challenges, the star player was more determined than ever. He had seen firsthand how the system operated, how it profited off the backs of athletes without providing them the support they needed. He wasn't going to let that go unnoticed. His actions had sparked a movement, and he was going to be at the center of it, no matter the cost. As the weeks passed, the fallout continued to unfold. The NCAA began to entertain discussions of compensation and student-athlete rights, though progress was slow. The star player's fight was far from over, but he knew that the seeds of change had been planted. His courage to speak out had made him a symbol of hope for countless athletes, and he was more determined than ever to see the fight through. The fallout was only the beginning. The star player had taken the first step toward a new era in college sports. Now, it was time to push forward, to continue the fight for fairness, for respect, and for the recognition of athletes' value in the system. The battle was just getting started. The national conversation about college athletes, sparked by the star player's public comments, had begun to shift the dynamics within the world of college sports. The NCAA was now facing an unprecedented wave of scrutiny, but the immediate aftermath of the controversy was not just about systemic change, it was also about personal battles, rivalries, and the internal politics of the athletic world. The college basketball world was divided. While some athletes stood in solidarity with the star player, there were others who viewed his public outburst as a betrayal of the system that had given them opportunities. Rivalries, which had once been limited to games on the court, now found a new outlet in the debate about athlete compensation. One such rivalry was between the star player and a respected coach from a competing school, a coach who had long been a staunch defender of the traditional Coach Thomas NCAA was one of the most system. Respected figures in college basketball. With decades of experience, he had built his career around the structure of college sports, and he had always believed in the power of the current system. To him, athletes were given opportunities that most people could only dream of: scholarships, the chance to play on a national stage, and, ultimately, the potential to go pro. Coach Thomas had long been an advocate for student athletes, but he had never supported the idea of paying them or altering the structure of college sports. In his mind, they were there to get an education, and the basketball was just a bonus. When the star player spoke out, Coach Thomas was quick to criticize him. He called the comments misguided and out of touch with the reality of college athletics. On a national talk show, he defended the status quo, arguing that college sports were meant to teach athletes discipline, hard work, and responsibility, not to turn them into paid professionals. "These kids are getting a free education," he said, "and that's more than enough compensation. If they don't like it, they can leave. Nobody is forcing them to play." The rivalry between the star player and Coach Thomas had been simmering for years. While they had never clashed directly on the court, their differing views on the role of college athletes had always been a point of tension. Now, with the star player's public comments, that tension had boiled over into an open feud. The star player was aware of Coach Thomas's criticisms, but he wasn't intimidated. He knew that Coach Thomas represented the old guard of college sports, a group that was unwilling to accept that the system was flawed. The star player had seen how the system had used and discarded athletes like him, and he wasn't going to back down just because a respected coach had spoken out against him. "Coach Thomas is part of the problem," the star player said in an interview after hearing the coach's remarks. "He's been part of the system that takes advantage of us, and now he's going to try to turn it around and make it seem like we're the ones in the wrong? No. This is about fairness. This is about respect. And he's not going to stop me from fighting for it." The feud became the focal point of the ongoing national debate. Sports media outlets, hungry for drama, pounced on the tension between the two figures. Headlines read, "Star player versus veteran coach," and "The old guard of college sports versus the new wave." The rivalry between the star player and Coach Thomas was portrayed as a battle between the traditionalists and the reformers, a clash of ideologies that mirrored the larger debate over college athletics. But the personal rivalry wasn't just about public statements and media battles, it was also about power. Coach Thomas, having been entrenched in the system for so long, had significant influence over the future of college basketball. His opinion mattered to coaches, administrators, and even fans. The star player, however, had something that Coach Thomas couldn't ignore: the attention of the public. The media coverage, the public outcry, and the growing support from fellow athletes meant that the star player was no longer just a player on a team, he was a symbol of something much larger. The tension between the two reached a boiling point when their teams were set to face off in a high-stakes game. The star player's team, fueled by the controversy, was determined to prove that their fight for fairness wasn't just about words, it was about action. The coach, knowing how much was riding on the game, prepared his team with the same level of intensity and focus that had earned him his reputation over the years. The game itself was a spectacle. The rivalry between the star player and Coach Thomas was palpable on the court. The star player, more determined than ever, played with a fire that had been ignited by his recent experiences. He was no longer just trying to win for his team, he was fighting for something bigger. Every move, every shot he made seemed to carry the weight of the battle he was facing off the court. Coach Thomas, on the other hand, maintained his usual calm demeanor, but it was clear that the stakes were personal for him. He was fighting to preserve a system that had worked for decades, and the outcome of the game felt like more than just a win or loss. It was about proving that his way was the right way. The tension between the two figures reached its peak in the final minutes of the game. With the score tied and only seconds left on the clock, the star player drove to the basket, determined to win for his team and for the movement he had become a part of. As he rose for the final shot, Coach Thomas's defense collapsed around him. The star player made the basket, securing the win for his team. The crowd erupted in cheers, but the moment wasn't just about the victory. The star player's triumph on the court symbolized his larger fight off the court. It was a victory for fairness, a victory for every athlete who had ever felt like they were being used by the system. As the game ended and the teams left the court, the rivalry between the star player and Coach Thomas seemed to shift. The coach, in the midst of his disappointment, made his way toward the star player. The two met at the center of the court, their rivalry now a backdrop to a larger conversation. The star player extended his hand, offering a gesture of respect despite the heated battles between them. "I don't agree with you," Coach Thomas said, shaking the star player's hand, "but I respect your fight. I've never seen anyone stand up for what they believe in the way you have. That's something I can't ignore." The star player nodded. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to fight for all of us. The system needs to change." The exchange was brief, but it marked a turning point in their rivalry. While their differences remained, there was a mutual understanding now, an understanding that the fight for change was bigger than any one individual. It wasn't about defeating each other on the court or in the media. It was about the future of college athletics, and the star player had made his position clear: this fight was far from over.